feisty topic, as I said, which is there a problem with Canadian TV? And it seems that we've had quite a few speakers so far this morning saying that there are challenges with Canadian TV, but then we've had also quite a few suggestions as to ways that we can move Canadian TV forwards. I'd like to actually start off this panel by asking the panelists what they actually think the current state of Canadian TV is, whether there really is a problem or whether we're making a mountain out of a molehill. And I'd like to turn to you first, Barbara. Because when we spoke on the phone, I thought you had a really positive message, and I think the audience would like to hear that. What do you think the state of Canadian TV is?
Oh, gosh, that's a really big question. But I believe really firmly that the state of Canadian television is pretty exciting. That we actually have great content, more of it than ever before, that we are creating more attention to that great content in a lot of ways than we ever did before. And the evolution that we're in, and there's no doubt we're in a huge evolution of the industry, but the evolution, one of its outcomes is better content, more attention paid to that content, and more opportunity to keep more people engaged in great shows all the time. So the evolution's real, and in my experience, and I've kind of been at this for a long time, we've always been in a state of evolution in this business. There was a delightful time way back at the beginning with 3 channels and the world was easy, but that has not existed for decades now. So sure, we're in a disruptive time and an evolutionary time, but one full of promise and hope.
Okay, so very positive message. I understand, John, that you may have a more negative opinion of Canadian TV. In fact, somebody told me yesterday that you were the most loved person in the Canadian TV industry. That they shall remain nameless. What do you think the state of Canadian TV is?
Well, thank you. First of all, I'd say I'm not in the Canadian TV industry. I'm a journalist and critic for the Globe and Mail. I write about television, I don't make it, I'm not part of the industry. But I do think that having a panel with the question, is there a problem with Canadian television, and having it in a brewery, sounds like one of those just for laughs gag setups. I admire the optimism of people who are in the industry, but there are many problems with Canadian television. And when I say these things, I'm really channeling the views, my own views as a critic, a consumer, a citizen, and the feedback I get from Globe and Mail readers, which tends to be a lot. There is a deep skepticism about Canadian television. Certainly in terms of scripted programming, there is a strong sense that Canadian television is in general mediocre, often quite awful. There are a handful of exceptions to it, but I think it becomes a rhetorical question when you ask, where is Canadian TV in this golden age of television? We've been in this period where television storytelling has become the prime, it is challenging the novel for being the most important storytelling medium. What has Canadian television done in that period? Very, very little. I think Canadian television, many of the executives tend to be risk averse. Canadian television is essentially a protected industry. There are taxpayer funds or other funding for almost everything that is created here, and very little is actually created here in terms of scripted programming. I think the central problem is that risk-averse nature at the top in Canadian television, and that has created a skepticism among viewers about whether Canadian television is worth watching or not.
That was indeed quite scathing. I read an article where you said that Canadian TV executives spent all their money on private helicopters. Just for the record, can I ask Jean and Barbara, do either of you have a private helicopter?
No.
So just... Oh, wait, Jean?
No, actually, I would. I think that what John is referring to is certainly a perspective. I would dare to say that broadcasters and broadcasters around the country are always striving to develop some pretty unique and interesting programming content. The challenge, I think, is that we have been very much focused around where our supply is coming from, and certainly where I'm agreeing with John is that there are opportunities in the marketplace, and certainly an opportunity for us to be developing more original content, to that extent contributing more actively in the industry, in the marketplace, providing new content, and really being a bigger force around original Canadian content. And I mean, obviously the CBC plays a large role in that, and we are committed to that because of our mandate, but also because we feel that it is the place of the broadcaster and the public broadcaster to be able to drive original content in a marketplace that really is looking at a whole slew of content suppliers, a lot of it coming from the US.
That's a very fair point. I mean, back to, before I go to the agency chaps at the end there, I'd just like to go back to you, Barbara, because, I mean, so Jean makes his point about public service broadcaster, but, you know, when we spoke before, I got the feeling that actually Corus were making strides in this area, and you've got a very contrasting opinion. So, John, do you want to offer a rebuttal at all of John's comments?
No, but we at Corus make a huge range of content across a vast number of channels to reach a great array of audiences and frankly support a huge number of different advertisers. And I think we do that very well across this broad spectrum. I think, you know, we have excelled in some areas that really speak to the power of this marketplace and how you reach Canadians uniquely for something they really care about. I go to our lifestyle networks for that, where we have created tremendous stars. You guys know the names, from Mike Holmes to, you know, to Mark McEwen to, oh, there's hordes of them. So we have created a Canadian star system in the lifestyle world. We have absolutely spoken to Canadians that want to know about that restaurant in their community or that opportunity to renovate their home. And it's been very meaningful as a broadcaster in Canada to do that, and been tremendously helpful to advertisers. I don't apologize for any of that. I think it's been spectacular. I think we've done some really important work in our drama. Most recently, we had Mary Kills People, which I think was a very important drama, spoke to a key issue on the minds of Canadians today that's very much in the public discourse. It was well received by viewers, 1 million plus for each episode. It was created by a tremendous team of Canadian women, I will say, writers, directors, showrunner. So I think we're doing some tremendous stuff. Do we bang it on the head of that nail every single time? Absolutely not. Does any content creator? No. What's our obligation here? To keep trying and to keep at it, to be expert where we are most able to be expert, to respect the value of other content we can bring into our market that our viewers clearly want to be engaged with, to do a variety of deals, whether that's ransom and partner up with CBS and take advantage of the power of that American network, whether it's private eyes and take a big shot with a Canadian star like Jason Priestley and have a show that is now, you know, into a second strong season that showcases Toronto second only to the way Rookie Blue showcased Toronto a few years ago and was so successful. So I have no apology or rebuttal to that. Everyone has their taste. There's an enormous amount of choice out there, and that's both the opportunity and our competitive challenge, but we embrace it.
Okay, so some contrasting views. I'm liking this.
Here, right? Like, come on.
We're off to a good start. I'm now going to turn to our two objective gentlemen at the end. I'm pretty sure that Neil Johnston and Alastair Taylor have never been referred to as objective in their lives before.
Objectionable.
And I guess we should take it with a pinch of salt that Neil is probably trying to beat down the price of Canadian TV. But having said that, what is your view on the state of Canadian TV, Neil?
Well, I think there's two Canadian TVs. Firstly, there's English Canada and French Canada. French Canadian TV is very different to English Canadian TV. I think what we have talked about, the panel thus far, has been about English Canadian television. If you look at French Canada, the peak time schedules are dominated by French Canadian home-produced content, their own stars, their own star system, their own current affairs, etc. I'm a media buyer and I'm a numbers guy, so I look at the numbers. And there is a problem with the viewership of television in general in Canada, but more particularly in English Canada, in that viewing is falling by about 10% per year. And then within that, the younger audiences are falling off more quickly. So therefore, looking out for my clients' interests, we want television to be stronger and the schedules to be stronger. Some of the viewership falling off is because of technological advances not being necessarily measured properly, or actually some of the technology not having advertising opportunities, which is partly for today. There's the other danger really in Canadian TV, and this affects everybody in the room and the advertisers, is that the peak time schedules on the English conventional stations are dominated by US content. And we've seen a couple of times today already the growth of Netflix and Amazon and everybody else. These guys have got incredibly deep pockets, and actually, in my view, don't really spend that much on content when you look at their market capitalization. You know, Netflix is a $45 billion market cap company with a $6 billion content business. You look at Sky B in the UK, they're a £14 million market cap business with a £7 million content business. So therefore, there's a lot of headroom in Netflix, in my view, content budget. One of the easiest things for them to do would be to go to Hollywood and snap up a lot of the content that currently the Canadian broadcasters rely upon. So that's a big, big danger for the advertisers in this room, because if that content does go, then what's it replaced by?
Alastair, what are your thoughts, state of TV in Canada?
I mean, the fact that there is a segment within this conference called is like TV in trouble is immediately clearly the fact that it is, right? Everyone should recognize that. You know, do I think that we have a problem with television? Yes. Do I think we have actually a broader problem than television? Yes. Like, it's been alluded to repeatedly throughout this morning. And for any of you who are at yesterday's conversations, you know, we're measuring in CPMs across all channels. They are not created equal. We all recognize that. We need to create a new universal measurement system. That, to me, you know, the guy from Fox just did a great job of illustrating the value of the television spot versus a spot in the digital universe. And this isn't a conversation about beating digital up. It's simply a case of going, where's the value for my clients, right? And if it is about attention, you know, there's actually a broader conversation here that's not about the quality of content that's being created on Canadian television, but actually about the way that advertisers and agencies and people who work in agencies are approaching CPMs.
I think it's a valid point, because the reality is that we need to be following consumers. And from a measurement perspective, we're not there yet. But you know, when you look at the evergreen content and how consumers are behaving, they are viewing and consuming content in a longer window now than they used to. And we're not capturing that. And I think that when we look at the initiatives that are being launched by Numeris around video audience measurement, that's really going to focus on everything digital around video, it is going to bring a higher level of understanding of how people are behaving and how they are consuming TV.
Well, we had Lawrence publicly state that he would be prepared to pay more if he knew what engagement he was getting, right? And let's recognize we all work in a capitalist society where every year we're being asked to do more with less, right? That's a fact for every single one of us. So if the money could flow back to where engagement is, then theoretically the quality of the content could also improve, and it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy of an upward spiral.
Let me
Can I add something? Because one of the things that is probably one of the best kept secret in Canada is the high level of VOD consumption, and that consumption has grown by over 40% in the last 3 years. And when you look at that window and you realize that this is still an area which is very much underutilized by the industry from an advertising perspective, there is a gold mine there that we can certainly max out and leverage with all of our assets.
Okay, so we've covered some interesting topics there around measurement and around innovation, and I definitely want to go back to these. And also to your point, Alastair, that this panel was titled "Is TV in Trouble?" I'm pretty sure that Justin probably didn't want to name the conference "Canadian TV is absolutely fine, there's nothing to worry about," because he probably wouldn't sell as many tickets. But not trying to put myself in your shoes. But I'd just like to stay on the content topic for a moment longer before we move to the measurement and innovation. And John, you said you weren't in the TV industry. I'm giving you a promotion. I'm giving you a new job as the, executive commissioner of Bell. They're not on stage, so that's okay. I hope that's okay, guys. How do you think, what do you think, if you put yourself in the very expensive Italian leather shoes of a TV executive in Canada, how do you think you could fix this problem? Is it regulation? Is it negotiation with the agencies? Is it just...
Well, I'll start by saying that a number of years ago in one of my columns, I said that there were only 2 requirements to be a successful Canadian TV executive. 1, buy hot American programs. 2, be able to tell lies to the CRTC. That was the case, I think, a number of years ago. Now it's much more complicated. What I think is lacking is basic things like innovation in terms of the audience having better access to programs, to programming on demand. Netflix has spoiled people. They expect to be able to watch programs at any time they want. They expect to be able to binge watch a series. And Canadian television is still playing catch up in many of those areas. I think Canadian television was behind the curve, starting with the internet, failing to recognize how influential online is in terms of its influence on people's consuming, their taste, in terms of recommendations for how people want to spend their time or money. Canadian television is still largely, I think, playing catch up in terms of those basic things that viewers expect, such as access to a program at any time and being able to see an entirety of a series, or at least half a dozen episodes of a series, with some ease. I also think, if in this imaginary world I was put in charge of something, I would make the marketing of Canadian television content a lot smoother. We do make some types of very good programming in Canada in terms of unscripted programming. Barb Williams cited the lifestyle programs, Home and Garden, all of those things. We do that very well in Canada. The Love It or List It programs are excellent. They have a huge audience and they're extremely well done with a sense of originality. But even getting information about Canadian television is difficult. For somebody in my position, there is an enormous difference between access to what HBO, Netflix, or FX is offering and access to what Canadian television is offering. Those channels, those outlets, they have press-specific websites. And sometimes people in the Canadian industry will say to me, will accuse me of writing too much about the content of those outlets and not enough about Canadian TV. And sometimes it's mere pragmatism. I work for a daily newspaper. If there's something new coming on HBO, Netflix, or FX, there are press-specific websites that allow me access to their programming in a timely manner. It can happen with Canadian television that I simply want to see a program or get information about it. I send an email to somebody in the marketing or PR department of, say, Corus at 11 a.m. Nobody gets back to me until 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And I still have no idea if I'm actually going to be able to watch something to write about it. So if I was put in charge, one of the things that I would immediately do is make Canadian television more accessible just to the public, to the consumer in terms of on-demand access, and for the media in general, make it easier to be able to write about Canadian television. Excuse me, so those 2 points.
Okay, I think that's actually really interesting, jumping onto the whole kind of VOD and distribution experience. And before I go to you, Barbara and Jean, to talk about this, I'd like to go to our objective parties at the end there to ask them, Neil, what do you think of the actual TV distribution experience, maybe particularly focused on VOD in Canada? Do you think it's fit for purpose? Could it be improved?
No. Sorry. Yes and no. Some of the box technology is very old, and we're waiting on new generation boxes to come into market. And I think Bell, with their 5 boxes, have the most advanced product in market. I think everybody else is going to be bringing in Xfinity boxes from the US, from Comcast in the US, within the next year. So I think that is part of the problem, and that the technology that is being relied upon by the BDUs is out of date, and therefore it's out of date for, to John's point, he wants all of programming to be available to be binge watched. These are advertising funded businesses. In order to make the programming available to watch in a binge fashion, you have to be able to put dynamic advertising in there to pay for that programming. The technology doesn't allow for that yet, and that's why it's not available in that format. I think once the technology catches up with what the consumer wants and what Netflix is offering, etc., then it'll be better for everybody. But I think there's a new generation of boxes coming. Bell are here with 5, and everybody else is within the next year.
Alastair?
I think you're being incredibly generous. So guess what? Another British guy, but I'm Canadian now at least. But 7 years ago, I moved here. I was used to a skybox that was light years ahead of what we have here 7 years later. So the technology is, frankly, fucking miles behind. That's how blunt I have to be about it, right? And if we want to actually monetize what is, to your point, Jean, a growing piece of inventory, then get on it. It's got to be a priority.
Now, Jean, I remember when we were speaking on the phone beforehand, you were saying that actually the percentage of VOD watching in the French market was much, much higher than the English market. Could you expand on that a tiny bit, and also maybe answer some of Neil and Alastair's comments about user experience?
Yeah, well, I think that clearly when you look at the penetration of VOD in the French market, and we were talking about earlier, and Neil was referring to the attractiveness of original Canadian content in the French market. Clearly, that has been a driver. So you look at hours tuned and VOD consumption in the French market, and those levels are higher than in the rest of Canada. So consider that fact. It's no surprise that the VOD consumption will be mainly driven, or to a large proportion, driven around from the francophone market. But I want to come back to original content, because you did refer to it earlier, Neil. The one thing that has changed in the French market, in French Canada, is the shift towards more Canadian original content. And if you look back in the 1980s and you looked at schedules of TVA or Radio-Canada back in those days, they were very heavily filled with American programs. Dallas and all those series that were essentially purchased from the US. Competition brought that level up around original Canadian content, and now it's essentially 90% of the schedules in prime time. The reason for that, and I think that when we look at Britain and we look at other markets, there is a potential for Canadian content to be developed here, and we have to try, and we obviously, we can't be successful every time, and the failure rate in the US, I think, is higher than 50% on new products, so it wouldn't be surprising that we would be facing the same kinds of issues in the Canadian marketplace. But clearly, there's an opportunity for us to be doing more and be more successful And I think whether it's Britain or even French Canada, we can sense that there is success potential there. If you look at our creative agency products, I mean, we do build a lot of stuff. We produce and develop marketing and advertising content here in Canada that stands out and is successful. There's no reason why we couldn't do that with Canadian TV content.
I'd like to address that briefly, if I may. The situation in French Canada in Quebec with the amount of hours that people in that market spend consuming Canadian local storytelling, it's unique. Quebec is a micro ecosystem of television, and I'm not sure that what is happening there, the dynamic there in terms of people's interest in locally produced programming and storytelling, can actually be applied to the rest of Canada. It's a unique market. The Canadian market, the English language market in Canada is vastly different. The Canadian television arena is unique in that it is next door to the behemoth of American television storytelling. And I think going forward, there is very little that can be learned, I think, from French Canada in terms of what is successful there, because it is such a unique but micro ecosystem of television. And there's more that can be learned from what American television is doing, and that's about distinctive storytelling. There is an appetite out there in this golden age of TV, in this peak TV. There is an appetite for strong storytelling, for adult storytelling, for challenging storytelling. And in part, I think in Canada, it is up to the CBC, which is a hybrid of commercial and public broadcaster. It is up to the CBC, in large part, to make that kind of original, strong storytelling in Canada. And for the most part, it has failed over the last few years.
So I want to move...
So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to react to this.
Okay,
because,
that's fine.
For two reasons. One, I'm from French Canada, and actually I want to say that earlier a couple of speakers, you excused their French and used swear words. That's actually not French, so that you know. It was not French. And
It's English, apparently.
it is English language. But in reality, I do not believe that French Canada is unique. I don't believe that it is unique in the world.
No, it's not unique around the world. If you look at every, because I looked at this last year for something that I did. If you look at the Republic of Ireland, which is a very good example, right next to the UK, one of the strongest television markets in the world. The BBC, ITV, Channel 4, and everything from Sky beams into the Republic of Ireland. Yeah, 18 of the top 20 programs in any year are from RTE or TV3, which are the local TV-produced stations. So therefore, the fact that you're next to a dominant television market like Canada is to the US does not mean that people do not want to watch content produced about themselves.
Okay.
So one of the really exciting things about the technology question, which I think is maybe primary to this audience, is that actually we are seeing huge interest and attention paid to our shows on multiple platforms over longer and longer periods of time. Every time I see those numbers of +7, and then we see now, +28, and I look at a show like, I'm going to keep plugging here, Vikings, Canadian original, distinctive adult programming that's now into season 6. It's been extraordinarily successful. That audience doubles when you look at the PVR playback. And we know when you then get past 7 days, we get more and more of an audience. To me, there's hope in all that. That's where that opening statement comes from. If people couldn't be bothered to PVR something and catch up with it later and stay engaged with it over time, then we'd have a problem. But we don't have that problem. What we do have is the problem you're speaking to, which is we've got this push and pull between that opportunity for us as TV marketers to drive an audience to that VOD platform and keep them engaged, but knowing I can't quite sell that audience yet. So how quickly do I want to actually actively engage in moving an audience from a platform where I make money off them to a platform where I don't? But we acknowledge that we are fully in an on-demand environment now. It's the most important conversation we have at Corus is how do we become an on-demand provider of content? Because yes, everybody wants that sense as a consumer that at any moment I can find any show I want from any platform and sit down and watch it on any device I happen to have in my hand. That's an extraordinary promise that we would love to make to our consumers. We're not there yet. And we're in a bit of a push and pull of how much do we actually let people go there where we can't monetize them yet, because if we don't let them, they'll go somewhere else where they can do that. And how much do we rush along this technology so that we can actually keep monetizing our business? And yeah, I think the Comcast box, the Xbox that Shaw now is rolling out and that Rogers is now, accepted that they're going to roll out, and I personally, I think, they may beat out the $5, but in any case, you've got far improved technology coming. It's how do we get there faster? Because that really is the answer. The challenge is not the audience. When we measure a total audience over a month, and that's not even what happens after a month that I don't see, but when we measure a total audience over a month, it's as big and as powerful an audience as we ever used to get. So that 10% down that you're talking about, that's down in linear, but we make up for that in all that other platform viewing. So the audiences are huge still. But the measurement and the monetization piece, we are struggling with, and it's a slower, more frustrating process than I guess I would have hoped, because I'm getting more and more worried we're not going to get there before I'm done.
Okay, that is a very good point. The measurement and monetization, we haven't yet focused on that, and we've got about 10 minutes left before the break. By the way, audience, prepare your questions. I'm going to come to you in just a moment. Measurement and monetization. So, fellows from the agencies, you've just seen some brilliant presentations about cost per audible video second, whatever. It's really going to catch on, Joe, wherever you are. But the strength of the TV 30-second spot, the strength of complete view-through, complete viewability, complete audio, and the storytelling narrative compared to Google and Facebook. What do these guys need to do to get you to spend more money with them? And I know we've got a chicken and egg situation here because they want to invest in infrastructure and addressability and measurement, but you need to cough up some cash after this panel.
So, great point. So I think that, pretty much to your point, Barbara, the time to sit on our hands was years ago, right? At the moment at Starcom in Canada, we're trying to create what we're calling cost per human experience, right? Simple idea that, and I'm going to use French again, it's like how many people actually are going to give a shit about the brand after they've seen this piece of communication, right? And if I use Winners as one of the examples as one of our clients, why will someone walk past 3 places where they could buy clothes to then go to Winners? So it's not necessarily about, I need to know that they went this week and bought this week. I need to know that in an age of terminal connectedness, when a brand messes up, which they will do, and consumers will know about it, that consumers will still protect that brand, right? So that's what we're trying to do. Invariably, it's going to lead to me going to the broadcasters and saying, hey, listen, I need you to try and help me stitch together these 8 pieces of research to actually finally make this a reality in the next 5 years, right? And it might be that I need one of you to do this piece for the next 2 years and one of you to do this piece for the next 3 years. And eventually, I would like it to become a trading currency. And it will hopefully give us that sort of universal measurement across all of the different ways that we can deliver comms. It's maybe a bit utopian, maybe it's dangerous to say these things on stage when I'm like, hey, it might take us 5 years. Because most CMOs don't get that kind of timeline and lag, but we're working with some of our clients now. I'd welcome anyone who wants to help me try and test this theory and this thought.
So that's a story of cooperation. Now, Neil, I seem to remember last year you stood up on stage and promised a 5% increase in TV spend this year if the broadcasters were to enable addressability. And I understand that after 10 pints brought for me by Stuart Garvey and Greg McCallum last night, that they have enabled addressability already. So where's the extra 5% spend?
Have they?
Have they? Really? No, they haven't. They haven't. There are things that we can do that are more addressable within the TV ecosystem, but the reality of it is that they're relatively small to the overall size of the television ecosystem. That's the reality. We can do more. That's absolutely true. We're going to do more. We're going to get our clients to test and learn and get ready for the future. But in the overall system, it's what's available is still relatively small. Back to your original point in terms of the measurement, the TV measurement in Canada is, the system Numeris. It's an absolutely fantastic system for a country of the size. But the holes in it are it's not measuring very well the way that TV is being consumed, actually today and how it's going to be consumed in the future. The other thing for me is that we talked about. People have talked about it, we talk about it a lot, and people have already talked about it, is that, we want universal currencies. And to deny the fact that someone like a Google is in the video business, that a lot of that YouTube is now being consumed on a computer screen, yet for them not to be part of the conversation where Numeris is talking about the future of television and measurement and video and everything else seems to me at the very least incredibly short-sighted and at the worst sort of protectionist. So therefore, I think that conversation needs to be widened out into the wider sphere, because to deny the fact that our advertisers, our clients, are spending considerable amounts of money on YouTube, with bumps in the road like we have seen over the last month or two, and that will only going forward, I'm guessing, increase as viewing to YouTube increases.
Okay, so we're getting close to the end. I think we've learned a lot on this panel, actually. We've learned, I think cooperation is probably the biggest thing, and that if the agencies and the broadcasters cooperate, maybe with the brands as well, as we heard from Hyundai, we're going to see a 5% increase in TV spend, as you promised just now. I just heard that.
Every year.
We've learned that Barbara is going to employ John as a guest commissioner on a thematic channel for Corus.
That's never going to happen.
Focus on luxury yachts.
Can I ask John and Barbara a question? John, you said when you email Corus and you don't get a response, and then it's too late to review their programs. Barbara, is it because you think he's going to bury Corus and therefore you'd rather he didn't?
No. I can't begin to respond to that. If my publicity team were here today, I think they would be disappointed, concerned, and determined to be sure that they do the best job they possibly can to respond to the many requests we have for interest in our Canadian shows. We're proud of them. We aren't trying to hold back in any way from anybody having any part of them. So that's all I would say to that.
But when John gets his Corus email address anyway, it will be fine. He'll just be able to find you in Outlook. So. And the last thing we learned is that Jean is going to give myself and Joe from Fox some French lessons. But audience, we've only got a few minutes to go for the break, but I'd like some questions or some berating statements. Who's up for that? Oh, come off it. Come on. Oh, here we go. This gentleman at the front. So I wait for the microphone, and please say who you are.
Hey there. My question is about the percentage of Canadian content that's required on OTTs versus the percentage of Canadian content that's required on Canadian broadcasters. Netflix doesn't have to buy any Canadian programming, so they can go 100% into American, and I think that gives them an advantage over Canadian programming. I was wondering what your thoughts were.
There's nothing that could be added. What you're saying is absolutely true. Players that are coming in from outside of Canadian continent, Canadian territory don't have that kind of obligation and pressure, and that's really not level playing field. But I think that when you look at the commitment of the broadcasters in this industry, and you look at the level of commitment and the interest around Canadian content, original Canadian content, I think that is going to be driving the future of the offering from linear to VOD and to OTT. But at this point,
I think actually a lesson can be learned from the kind of Canadian content that Netflix is interested in. It's not fair to say that Netflix is entirely free of Canadian content. Netflix rescued Trailer Park Boys. It gave those guys a whole bunch of money and gave them enough for several more seasons of that show. It's involved in the reboot of Anne of Green Gables as Anne, which has been on CBC. So I think there's a lesson there in that Netflix is not stupid about the kind of stories that they know their Canadian subscribers are interested in. And those two examples are uniquely Canadian. There is an intuitive sense that Canadians want more of that. And I think that's something that everybody in the Canadian industry can learn from, is that the telling of distinctly Canadian stories is something that viewers will go for. It is a fact that Canadians read Canadian newspapers. The Globe and Mail has 7.5 million readers across all platforms every week. Canadians follow Canadian sports. Canadians buy and read Canadian books, novels, etc. They don't consume Canadian television with the same passion or interest. And that, I think, is the big gap in the picture. And maybe that gap can be filled by telling very distinctly Canadian stories for Canadian television.
And I would just add one other thought to that, because it's really interesting to think about how Netflix does play in international territories and where they choose to invest their dollars with the local broadcasters, if you will, or local production companies. And one of the things that it says to me about the work that Netflix has done in Canada in the couple of instances that John has mentioned, plus another that I'm going to plug from Corus in just a moment, but is that they understand we have great creative talent in this country. They understand we have great writers, great directors, we have great actors, and they are interested in working with that Canadian talent pool because they respect the quality of television that Canadians make. And they want to be a part of that where they see it can enhance their own service. So we do a show called Travelers that's on Showcase, stars Eric McCormick, and we have done that in partnership with Netflix. Now, we do a whole range of different deals. Every deal is a snowflake, as we would say. We wonder a little bit about where you're, a little closer to the enemy than not. But for sure, what it is saying is that Netflix has an enormous respect for the creative community here in Canada, which speaks to the quality of a Canadian television that is being made here consistently.
Well, it's almost time for the coffee break. I thought I'd just wrap up with a tough challenge for you. I haven't briefed any of these panelists on this. I would like...
There's a question there.
Oh, okay, Stuart, you can have a question. Okay, we cut the game I was going to play. It was meaningless. We want to hear from Stuart. Hope you've had some tequila, Stuart.
Well, I'd also like you to describe our evening last night, because I don't remember it. Only my stepmother. To John's very good point, that Canadians read Canadian newspapers and they watch Canadian news and they watch Canadian sport. Are we not missing the big elephant in the room in English Canada, where they've always been able to watch American television? And there is a very, very small cultural difference between Canadians and Americans. The Irish example always gets my goat a little bit, because I think Neil will probably agree that the Republic of Ireland populace is not a massive fan of the English populace. And therefore, for accents, they're probably not that keen on English people on their television screens. But I think we're missing the big point, which is we are the only market in the world where US cable networks have free, unfettered access to our cable system. And that creates the huge challenges that we have in creating and putting on Canadian content and making it pay back.
Here. It's a decision we made as a country a long time ago. It seems to be a challenging one politically to think about reversing, but it is an inherent and huge issue underlying our industry in Canada, and you know it does not go in reverse. You cannot be in Buffalo and watch Global Toronto. You cannot be in Seattle and watch Global Vancouver. They would never let that happen in the United States, but we let it happen here, and it does change the underlying structure of the Canadian industry for sure. It does speak too, though, to why some Canadian shows resonate better. I come back to lifestyle. It's uniquely Canadian. The gardening show about a garden in Canada is different than watching a gardening show with palm trees in it. And it's why HGTV actually over-indexes with its Canadian content, despite also having some American content on the channel. I think when it comes to scripted, it's harder to say that NCIS doesn't speak as easily back and forth across the border. It does. And I don't want to tell Canadians they're not allowed to watch that stuff. It's what they want to watch. So we have to figure out how you make it work in the system. And we came up with this clever little idea called simultaneous substitution. And is it the most brilliant idea ever? I don't know, but it's one that works for us for the moment until maybe we're willing to take a more aggressive position and think about not letting those signals in the country, and then you might see a different game played.
I think that the other aspect is that we can deliver scripted content that resonates with Canadians. I think that comedy certainly illustrates that. Whether it's Schitt's Creek or whether it's Kim's Convenience, we've been able to show that in the scripted arena, we're able to deliver and develop some pretty great storytelling and Canadian content. It shouldn't be, the proximity of the border should not be an excuse for not pushing the boundaries and pushing the limit. And I think that all broadcasters are committed to that. And it is to the advertisers and the media agencies' interest, ultimately, that we succeed in that.
And one last comment from John. You said?
I'd like to address the example of the Republic of Ireland, which has been brought up a couple of times. I'm a citizen of the Republic of Ireland, and I was there last week. It's where I got this cold I'm recovering from. In Ireland is a special example because it is next door to the UK. But if you look at the top 10 most watched programs in the Republic of Ireland, the majority of them are Irish-made programs. People in Ireland will watch in droves Coronation Street and EastEnders, but they will also watch the Irish sort of equivalent of that. They will watch them because they are distinctly Irish. They have no hesitation in people in characters in scripted programming, speaking with a thick Irish accent or rural accent. They deal with very specific Irish stories. And the Irish are great storytellers. The lesson from that, I think, is that very distinct, culturally specific storytelling will work with a local audience. There have been improvements in Canadian television over the last few years. Kim's Convenience is a good example, but there needs to be more of it. There needs to be a faith in Canadian stories, and there needs to be the backing for Canadian stories from Canadian broadcasters. Instead of putting a show on the air, being disappointed with the numbers the first or second week and dropping it, you have to stick with that distinct Canadian storytelling and have faith in it, and in the end, it works.